Robin, we're discussing, Africa's history, going all the way back, Nile Valley civilization, origin of man, etc. I think we've kind of brought things up to where the second rise of Europe, in terms of after the Arab Moorish domination from 7th century to late 15th century, shall we say 1492. I want us to go from there because certainly now Europe is becoming dominant and we're approaching the slave trade. But I want us to back up a little bit and have an understanding of what was going on with the Arabs in terms of their involvement, not just in North Africa, but certainly East Africa, going all the way down to Mozambique. And, I want to start off like you're filling us in, because the Portuguese gained naval superiority, let's say in the 1400s. And we know that by 1487, they had rounded the Cape of Good Hope, led by people like Bartholomew Diaz and Vasco da Gama. And they now had access, shall we say, as traders to the treasures of East Africa. And then they sort of interacted then with the Arabs who were there previously. And of course, they're also going to get involved in the slave trade in terms of the west coast of Africa and certainly Central Africa. But what had been happening, and perhaps it was going on, I think, probably before the 7th century, in terms of the Arabs in East Africa. That Arabs were a dominant trading power in Eastern Africa, engaging in gold and ivory. Certainly there were intermediaries between the East Coast of Africa and, let's say, India and China and Indonesia. There's evidence of that. Their strongholds were in places like Zanzibar, Pemba, and Kilwa, and then on the east coast of Mozambique, and in terms of the interior of Africa. But I think that the Arabs at that point in time in East Africa didn't really pose a threat to African institutions because they intermarried with the Africans and became Africanized. Now, is that the basis of this whole Swahili culture, et cetera, et cetera? Can you take us through that?
Yes, I can.
Part and the Arabs before we get into the Arab slave trade.
Yes, I could do that, sir. The East African civilization was Bantu. The Swahili language is a Bantu language. And if you want to judge it in terms of purity, it might be the second purest Bantu of the Bantu languages after Kikongo. How you judge purity is there's a certain list of words that scholars use, words for different parts of the face, different parts of the body, words that you wouldn't borrow from any other culture, and compare that to what they call Proto-Bantu to see how many of those words have survived. And in the case of Swahili, it has the second highest figure of all the Bantu languages, second only to Kikongo. So the Swahili civilization is a Black African civilization. It's not an Arab civilization. The idea that it was an Arab civilization is Eurocentric scholars engaging in fraud. And they have fooled so many generations of scholars with their fraudulence. It's shocking. And we have to shout out some scholars like England's Dr. Basil Davidson, England's Mark Horton, who have actually tried to tell the truth and say, no, this is not Arab, this is African. But there were some foreigners there, but those foreigners weren't Arabs, they were Persians. And we know this because some intermarriage did happen between Persian elites and African elites, because the Persians, their remains have been found buried in the elite tombs. But the Swahili civilization really is a Black African or a Bantu civilization. It's not Arab. And so the glories of Kilwa, Zanzibar, all the way up to as far north as Brava, Mogadishu in Somalia, as far south as Sofala in Mozambique. That was an African civilization. And Black people should take great pride in that civilization. Some of the greatest architecture in African history, houses of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 stories, an aesthetic that they call Swahili chic, which you could build houses like that today and rich Black people would like to live in. I saw an article on, you know, the supermodel Naomi Campbell?
Yes.
Yeah, you know, she has a mansion in Kenya, and that mansion is built in a semi-Swahili style. And you can, those of you watching this, Google Naomi Campbell mansion in Kenya and see it for yourself. So what she is living in is traditional but grand African architecture. The Swahili civilization was a civilization of splendor, of grandeur. I mean, I've explored some of the ruins. I went to sites like Jumba Matwana, Munarani, Gedi. I visited these places. I went to the various museums. Very, very impressive. But your average Kenyan doesn't know that that's his history. He thinks it's Arab history because of the psychological damage done by the propaganda put out there by lying archaeologists like James Kirkman, and his nonsense has essentially mashed Black people up in separating them from their history and their heritage, right? Now, there is a Swahili archaeologist, Professor Felix Chami, who is trying to spread the message to his people that this is your history, claim it. So big up to Felix Chami. But at present, your average Kenyan, I can speak for Kenya because I've been there, doesn't know this stuff. They think it's Arab. Now, credit to the museums. The museums do make it clear Swahili is Bantu.
Greetings. My name is Robin Walker. I'm also known as the Black History Man. I am perhaps best known for my 2006 book, When We Ruled. Based on this book, I'm launching a new online history course aimed at you, the adults. You could be a parent, you could be a teacher, a mechanic, cleaner, professionals, care workers, security guards, taxi drivers, kitchen workers, entrepreneurs, tech heads, lawyers, all of you. We want people from all over the world to be empowered by our content. We want you to gain mastery over your history and heritage. And you can do this by subscribing to our course. Click on the link to get this powerful, life-changing material.
Yeah, but your general public, including the guides that were taking me around these sites, you know, and then I asked them some obvious questions. But who was buried here? They had to admit Africans were buried there. And then I said, but doesn't that tell you Africans built this? Oh, but they were the slaves. And that shows just how much the propaganda has kicked in. Do you see? Now, the other things too about the trading, the ships, you know, the ships were called dhows. Unfortunately, the term dhow is also used in the Arab world. And that gives the impression that the shipping was Arab. In fact, those ships were African, right? Yeah. So consequently, the people sailing from East Africa to Oman, East Africa to India, East Africa to China, East Africa to Cambodia, where they established a colony, East Africa too. You know that there's new evidence that those East Africans probably landed on the northern fringes of Australia, and they got there 600 years before Captain Cook. Yeah. A British right-wing newspaper called the Daily Mail has an article which I use as teaching material called How 900-Year-Old African Coins Ended Up in Australia. There's a whole article. Again, people watching this, Google it, get that article from the Daily Mail. And the coins came from Kilwa Kisiwani in Tanzania. And those coins date back to around about 11th, 12th century, something like that. And they were discovered on the northern fringes of Australia. And therefore, the likeliest theory is that's where East Africans were sailing to. You may already know that East Africans from Mombasa, which on a modern map is in Kenya, sent the Emperor of China a giraffe. And that giraffe landed in 1414. And there's a Chinese painting where there's a giraffe in the painting. And that confirms the story of 1414. And we know that there were East African traders in China. And there's a Chinese document that mentions them. And the Chinese document has got the name of the trader. And then when you translate it from the Chinese characters, his surname is given as the Zanj, yeah. And so
Black Zanj.
So Zanj is the word, part of the word Zanzibar.
Okay.
Yeah, and the term Zanj means black. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And in other languages like Turkish, Zenci is their version of the same word Zanj. And Zenci is also black, yeah? A term used for black people. It's not the only term Turks use, but Zanj, Zenci, same thing. Zanzibar, same thing. So Zanzibar was originally a black civilization before the Arabs took it over in 1698. And so the East African history was an African history before the Arabs took them over, 1698.
As a thank you for visiting our website, we are giving you a free copy of our exclusive 100 Black History Facts, which is in fact a taster of our course content. Make sure you leave your email address and we will send it right to you. We hope it inspires you to dig deeper into your history and heritage.
You know, what's interesting is, you know, when you read about things, you hear about, you know, the Portuguese, as I just mentioned, traveling around the Cape and getting to East Africa. But the talk about them getting there and shall we say, encountering, you know, the Arab presence in.
Let me answer that.
Go ahead.
That's probably European scholars lying. What they encountered was an Islamic presence, not an Arab presence. The Portuguese, I've got the first Portuguese account, and it's written by a scholar called Duarte Barbosa, and he's writing somewhere around 1517, and he describes the people along the coast. And he describes what they looked like, what they were wearing, and so on, so forth. Now, he does say some of them weren't black. He does say that. But those people would have been traders, but then that doesn't make them Arab. Do you see? Yeah. And those would have been traders that, and so, but generally speaking, what Duarte Barbosa describes, he talks about how they dressed, and they would wear capes, and then underneath the cape, the men would be bare-chested, and then they'd be wearing a kind of kilt. And that type of dress, we now know exactly which African ethnic group that is. It's the Mijikenda. The Mijikenda is the ethnic group that we could rename Swahili. Do you see?
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah, so we know exactly which group of Africans it was.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. You know, that brings, you know, great clarity. I just want to sort of finish up that period, shall we say, in terms of the Portuguese, you know, coming around the Cape and encountering this, and of course, they wanted to exert their influence, so they plundered, you know, Kilwa, as we were talking about, which was a major commercial port of East Africa, in 1502, and Zanzibar in 1503. And you know, and continued until they destroyed everything, and I think they attacked Sofala, as you mentioned, back in 1531. So that led to the decline of that, shall we say, autonomous East African trade.
Absolutely.
By the Portuguese.
Yeah, but the people that they were attacking, certainly the people that they were attacking were Muslims, but these were African Muslims.
Again, that gives great clarity. Yes.
Yeah, and the other thing too is, having visited the sites myself, or some of them, certainly the ones in Kenya, Muslims weren't the only Black people that were there. If you visit these sites, you'll notice that there's always a mosque, which would be the site of Islam, but there's also always a baobab tree. And baobab trees, all the guides told me the same thing. They were used by the non-Muslims as places of sanctity and so on, so on and so forth, which would suggest that not every Swahili was Islamic. There would have been those that converted, and there would have been those that kept to traditional religions, and they were both there on the coast.